So Vince, we've gone from data science and more intelligent ways of understanding the city that go beyond, who knows, a government PDF on what a zoning plan looks like, to the fact that there are social networks that are beginning to drive new models that have businesses behind them. What's your perspective? You do a lot of the work with developers around placemaking, which is effectively off the back of characteristics and qualities of place. And is Sydney doing it well, and what do we need to do better?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you for that introduction. It's interesting because, we're in business because we want to design a better world. We want to help people across society in all, walks of life, etc. So that comes from a genuine, caring perspective. And I guess, interesting what you said, Christian, about reverse engineering when you mentioned about New York and when someone looks at the city through that cool technology you've got, to find a place that's specifically to your requirement is really cool. But what we often find when we're working on projects, such as property marketing projects, is we have to when we're asked to kind of market a development, we actually look at reverse engineering. Why is it there in the first place? We go, why? What's the purpose? How come it's there? Obviously a developer wants to do something and make a significant change or a significant return on their investment. But we kind of we got to dig deep and trying to find what's unique about that place, and how can we engage the community to design a brand or an experience or a place that actually is relevant to them. And I think there's kind of a really nice kind of, shift in the world and in the way that we look at place and home and community. And it feels to me like, I'm a sensitive guy, but I feel like we're kind of going back to sensitivity. We're actually, perhaps we're being less greedy. Perhaps we're actually wanting to do combined. We want to do the right thing. As an individual living in a city, I feel inadequate. I feel like I can't make ever enough money to buy in. I've been through a divorce. I came from England. Things happen in life, which takes you off the situation where you'd never have enough money saved up to be able to put some money down on a property. And even when you do, the price has gone up so much that you're paying $10,000 whatever plus a month, which you then can't afford and puts you under enormous pressure.
And whether you actually even really want to own it in the first place. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's interesting that it seems like we're moving back to communities. And I think you said something, Jason, earlier about it takes a village to raise a child. And we've lost the community, which is really so important for us as humans, as animals. That's the way we're meant to be. And we've moved so far away from that. I think it's interesting. We're moving to what you're talking about, smaller homes, different ways of living, etc. And in a way, we're shifting towards apartment living, which is very much that. And I think you're still able to design, amazing apartments that are relevant to the way that we live today, not just simply imposed on us because of maximum return of investment. I think we look at technology. We as a design company, we often have to create, someone will come to us and they have a product or building or whatever they've already done. They come to us and we've got to give that place a name, a sense of a strategy, and then we need to create a whole bunch of collateral to go out and start communicating with a potential buyer. So it's kind of, they will design and build it, and then we'll go find someone who wants it. I think what's exciting today is we now have the technology and the data and the information to be able to connect with those consumers in the very beginning, understand what they want specifically. And the Nightingale approach is very much that. That's really, really exciting and really, really powerful. And that's something that we as a business want to kind of tap into, to be able to not impose a lifestyle on somebody or a design, but actually have them very much part of the co-creation of that. And as a business as well, we find that co-creation has become a very powerful tool, and I mean, a lot of you guys will be working that way, where we're working closely with our clients, with the community, with stakeholders, and so it's far more open than it ever was before. It used to be a designer would go away and design something, and that was it. The ta-da moment, or an architect would design a building and it'd be built, and that is that. But today and some people resisted that change, but I think it's definitely a change for the better. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but...
Challenge us.
Yeah.
Challenge us.
Well, no, maybe you want to kind of interject with some questions or something.
So one of the things that
come up here.
So one of the things that Nightingale offers is also a disruptive model for you, Vince, because they talk very strongly about removing the intermediary of the real estate agent and of the marketer. So actually you save on those and you reinvest. Not only you save on the basement, but you also save on those extra overs that a classic traditional development model need to rely on. So there's also a challenge in this. But Nightingale shows, I think, that it's not either or. It's not a matter of ditch the professional, dare I say it, but it's a matter of work with. There's a new model of working with. It's the co-creation. Jason?
I think it's there's a upskilling of the architects now, and how do you facilitate a co-creation process? How do you get 50 people to go through a consensus-driven design? And when you are transparent with them, so the other thing about Nightingale, it's 100% transparent. Every penny it goes towards that development, for the fees for the development manager, the architect, all the consultants, planning authorities. Everything is looked at how we can squeeze the process down to reduce costs to the buyer. The buyer sees that entire financial model to understand every decision impacts their purchase price. So when they have that model in front of them and they're talking about whether they want an ensuite bath or more living area, what do you think they usually choose? Not having an ensuite bath, not having luxury marble countertops, not having whatever estate agent's telling you the market wants. So you get this really good diversity. I mean, I love there's some beautiful apartments being done out there by developers, like, don't get me wrong. But this just frees up architects to do very kind of citizen responsive design outcomes. And what I love about co-creation, you create a very unique vernacular of architecture. The buildings happening down in Melbourne speak to the ethos and ideology of the anti-establishment culture of Melbourne. They look different than everything else around it. They're very place-driven, and that's how you keep that identity of Melbourne intact, not just putting up a whole bunch of towers everywhere. And that's going to keep the cultural capital and the investment keep coming in Melbourne.
But this is why, Christian, your lens on this, which is in some ways a psychographic way of looking at the city, you showed us the way you navigate the streets and what it is that you see when you navigate the streets. This is different from what young girl likes to call bird shit planning, which is we fly over and we just look at everything from top down. So actually your model represents a far more sophisticated way of seeing the city and its potentially impact of development than actually those who currently have a monopoly on that, which is planning department. This is no criticism, it's just the reality, which is planning department has a monopoly on the idea of planning. It develops zonal plans, etc., which see generally a more blanket approach. You're an R2 or an R7 or whatever we want to call it. Whereas you're beginning to offer a model of planning and forecasting and development that can be quite place-specific, which is what Jason's talking about. The question is, can you put those tools in the hands of the communities that don't know that they can access this stuff? And Vince, is there a way of actually then sticking that on steroids and putting that to scale? So can you decentralise and democratise the software that you're driving, Dr. Christian?
Yes.
And tell me how, and Vince, how
Elaborate on that a bit.
what does the interface look like? Christian, Vince.
So hence we call it, originally, the intention behind it, as I said, was civitas, to give it, it was meant to be for the civic good, we kind of thought about it initially, and it was for quantifying quality of place, not for property search, right? What's interesting, you just mentioned zoning is a big problem we find. What we see in the models is that zoning doesn't make a lot of sense quite often, yeah? What we see in our models as very much more organic boundaries that we find, especially when it comes to activation and other types of mixes of amenities and utilities and dynamic operations of place. That's actually something that you mentioned quite a lot, Jason. You talk about what it looks like, but actually we sort of disregard it in a way what it looks like literally from the aesthetics, and we look at the processes underneath more and what spatially from a quality, how it's perceived, right? So if you look at sort of Lynch's book, The Image of the City, was not really about the image. It was it was a proverbial image. It was more of a translation into, or metaphorical image into how people read spaces, right? And not what they feel it looks like. And I think nowadays we have to get away from that. I think that's also in your field, Vince, a little bit, to sell the cafe chains and so on, right? So it's the mix has decreased a lot, right? So we see what we feel as a good community being sold by branding is actually not what it requires quite a lot, quite often. And what's happening nowadays also with the new placebo for solving all the housing crisis being built to rent
to be proven.
Will exacerbate the situation because the developers behind build to rent want to compete on the amenities they provide in the community. So they will actually try to outdo each other in community and amenity provision and will copy each other's amenities. Therefore, the strain will be on literally communal facility like hospitals, schools, and so on, right? Because that's the stuff that you can't replicate in your own development. Yeah? And it's going to be quite interesting that certainly build-to-rent won't resolve the question of housing. It will possibly exacerbate the situation. But yeah, models like ours, you can democratize them. There is no reason why you shouldn't. In fact, a lot of the models, as we discussed, sometimes are built on this sort of decentralized logic, right? That you also like, so there's notion of the smart contract and the blockchain idea that you have a participatory system in some way that's not controlled by any specific individual instance that you can contract into, and the contract is effectively open, everybody can see it, so it's secure in that sense, and you don't need an intermediary. Now, to the contrary, sometimes we want public and government departments to use our work. We're like pining, we're building it for them effectively, right? And it's always in the end developers who come around and say, that's really useful to us, right? We can really de-risk our developments through this, yeah? And anticipate planning, or planning critique, if you like, yeah? And therefore, we have unfortunately also in some ways already sort of disrupted sometimes in New York the developers market, the sort of real estate market by cutting out the broker with the models that we've done. So the landlords, actually large landlords have saved a lot of money doing this, right? So nobody else saved a lot of money, but actually large landlords. So of course in that sense it was a disruption, but it's not necessarily the intended disruption for the benefit of the community, so for communal or social equity. Yeah.
I've got another question for you, Vince, which I want to throw to before we go to audience, which picks up actually on Katie's point and deeply personalises it, because generally everything these days, I turned 44 and everything is ultimately an anecdote for me.
Only 44?
I live in a 3-generation household, and it's my mother-in-law, which of course invites a whole lot of jokes. It is a delightful experience, in case you don't know. Mother-in-law, in case I haven't told you the story, why would you know?
We're about to hear it. Here we go. Go on.
Should only take 15 minutes, I promise. 4:30 on a Saturday, mother-in-law comes down from upstairs. We're in a 4-storey terrace, actually, but because of a quirk of planning that no architect would ever design in, the top 2 floors don't connect to the bottom 2. You've got to go out in the street. So actually, an imperfect design makes for a perfect strategy. Mother-in-law's door closed. We all, stop shouting at the kids, etc. She walks in with a bottle of wine. We all play happy families. My question actually is, and I'm glad you raised that perspective, Katie, because we don't have enough of these human stories in property development. They are very much around, property as commodity. My question for Katie and for Vince then is, it's going to sound really wimpy and really weak, but is there something that is missing from the pages of marketing and advertising to say it's okay not to have your own place? It's okay. There are, forgive me, cool experiences to be had in a communal setting. Me, wife, 3 children, mother-in-law. Sometimes I'd prefer to spend the time with mother-in-law than the rest of them. So, is there a dimension to this we're missing?
I think it's all about how it's framed, really. Back in the day, it's really always been associated with the hippie commune, very much in that get your dreadlock on and very grimy, as is the whole permaculture scene, the whole sustainability scene. And I guess even our own business is very interested in kind of demystifying that and trying to make these things more urban, more beautiful, less hippie and more everyday commonplace, because they just make sense. But they just look pretty hideous right now. A compost bin, a worm farm, all these things, they look hideous. And it really needs to get in terms of communal living, I guess a far more urban, compact kind of look to it. And Then I guess the thing that's underestimated with these spaces is the importance of privacy as well.
Yep.
Just you mentioning that whole idea of the separate entry. I mean, despite having these communal spaces, the underestimated thing with communal living is the necessity for privacy, and that's really where the designer comes in, because it's those little interstitial spaces and those moments that we all very much need to be part of community, whether it just even be acoustic separation. They need to be so carefully conceived and thought about to actually make a communal environment work. Which I'd question you about, Vince. We actually, as a practice, got involved in the design of this courtyard space and believe this to be one of a truly great representative of a co-working space. But how does it work acoustically? Do you get affected by the bouncing around of the courtyard of the cafe? Does it work as a communal space?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, it's this cafe is normally full of hundreds of people every day, from 8 o'clock till 3 o'clock. It's not an ad, and we're upstairs. And it's just wonderful. I mean, we were nervous about coming into this area because we were in Surrey Hills before and thought that people would feel uncomfortable coming here or finding a farther journey, and it actually turned out to be perfect location and all that. I think it's funny when you talk about, you asked that question, the new model, or maybe I've gone off tangent here, but do we need to own a place? And I think that we all succeed very well when we don't. We still. I remember when I was a kid playing with my brothers and sisters, back in Canada, building forts, building houses, playing store, playing shop. We do that as human beings. There's something in us that makes us want to create our, a dwelling or whatever it might be. And I think that we've been removed so far by trying to be so modern and so sophisticated through technology and modern living that there's a consequence for that. We become addicted to technology. We become, in this bloody bright light, it's so artificial that it's actually affecting us in a detrimental way, not just on stage, but in our life in general. The way that we live is no longer healthy. And we're going to shrinks, we're going to health farms, we're reading about it, we're going to gyms, we're trying to live this kind of fake life, getting a bit kind of philosophical, but it kind of is true. Is that we're living further away from the earth, we're further away from ourselves, understanding ourselves. And I think what's exciting, and you say about the kind of the hippie roots, and my parents were very much from that mindset, so thankfully they taught me an alternative way of living and approach to life. And I find that it seems to be that is shifting towards becoming the norm, slowly. But veganism is one of the fastest growing diets in the world. This new way of living, having a choice in where we live, even being sensitive to alternatives, as opposed to just going down that rat race and doing it what everybody expects you to do. I think we're at an exciting moment in time, and maybe we won't see it fulfilled for another few generations, but it's certainly on our way to wanting to do the right thing. And I think that's wonderful how humans come together, they think that way naturally, and they're beginning to kind of self-correct for the good of themselves and their families and stuff.
Are there any questions for the guys? Is that a hand? That's a hand. Hello.
Cool. Yeah. How do you stop? I think Jason was mentioning before. So the continuum from place has artists and creatives there, becomes cool and hip, then becomes super expensive, which you alluded to earlier, and you said cryptically how cities must adjust to this reality. But that's quite and there's a lot of market. Sometimes the hipsters arriving happens organically, other times it happens through marketing, other times it happens through the kind of projects you're talking about. But that next step of all of a sudden, as soon, like Austin, for example, and places like that in the US, which all of a sudden become like, whoa, Austin is so exclusive now. So what have you got to say for yourself?
Yeah, that's exactly the point of the Community Land Trust. I've been advising cities like that for a long time. So I'm an urban refugee from New York City because I got priced out of New York and had a child. And I'm one of those, I wouldn't say I'm a hipster, but I moved to Seattle because it was 30% lower cost of living. I could raise my kid on a lot less money and have a better quality of life. That's the reason I went there. Plus, there are some kick-ass architects there. Austin's the same way. So when I looked out of New York, it was Austin, Portland, and Seattle. Because those cities had authenticity. They had really killer nighttime economy. They had good music. They had good food. They had great culture. There was this eclectic nature about them that drew me to them. So that's what I mean about city brand. And I mean, that's what I mean that none of them give a shit about being global cities. They care about their sense of identity and their locality. But because all these Gen Y, Gen X millennials started flooding out, like a price out of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, into Austin, Seattle, Portland, Pittsburgh. Cleveland's doing better stuff than Austin is, by the way. Then all those young talent came in, Apple came in, Google came in, and that's what I said, it skyrocketed. That's because they didn't plan for that. They didn't temper land value inflation. They didn't put the tools, mechanisms, and planning around that growth. Same thing's happening in Newcastle. I was just up there for a week ago, and Mayor Nuttall is nervous because, bam, they flipped the switch. Money's coming in. They're selling penthouses for $6 million. But Newcastle's so freaking cool because it was affordable. This whole thing on innovation districts, like innovation happens when you have like nothing. Innovation happens with the power of limits. I worked on South Lake Union in Seattle for 6 years. We never focus on innovation. We focus on creating a really cool local place. The innovation came when the companies that wanted a good place, wanted local retail, not franchise retail, wanted human scale development, wanted human scale outcomes, wanted good transit, wanted walkability. That led innovative companies to want to be there. And they wanted their employees to have that kind of lifestyle. But if you don't have really strong provision for affordable housing, and the best one out there right now, there's no models in Australia for it, is land trusts, because it takes chunks of land out of speculation and creates permanent affordable housing and permanent affordable business places. Like, I'm worried about Newcastle because Marcus did a great job on revitalizing Hunter Street with Renew Newcastle, and you have all these creative artists, makers. It's awesome to go up there because you can buy stuff that's made there that you can't buy anywhere else in the world, and that's awesome. But now with the development happening there, those are all going to get priced out. The other model that's really important is cooperatives. So there could be a makers cooperative, an artist cooperative, housing cooperative. Cities all over Europe use them. Thousands and thousands of units, they scale up. And that also creates permanent affordability of place. If you just let everything go to highest and best use, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get, I call it reverse ghettoization. It's ghettos of the rich. And I had this funny theory in New York. So what I didn't like about New York is it got completely commoditized. I'm on the Upper West Side guy. My neighborhood grew glass towers like weeds, A.M. Stern buildings like crazy. Lost my beloved diner, lost Big Nick's, who'd been there for 63 years, and the grill never turned off in 63 years. It was all replaced by a Starbucks, a cell phone store, a pharmacy, and a bank. It all went to this kind of franchise way, and I just this is not my New York anymore. I don't want to be here.
But just going to interrupt, but wasn't that was new at one stage too?
What was?
Well, the grill, the 63-year-old grill that was never turned off. That place was.
It was, but it was it's a one-off thing.
But I wonder if it created the same effect to the local people, like this new restaurants come or a new development, different scale, of course.
But if you take portions of the city, I know it's a different model, but if you take those land trust models out, you can have local businesses start, incubate, and stay permanently affordable. So it tempers land value inflation. If you're going to have demand on land and you're competing it for education, housing, work, whatever, you're putting pressure on land. It's a finite resource. There's only so much of it to house 9 billion people. You're going to have this problem.
Because isn't that part of the Nightingale model that when you've actually bought into that type of development, it's then got a capped resale value? Is that part of that model? Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes. So we try to aim to be 20% below market. In the purchase and sale agreement, there's a covenant that you cannot resell that on the market. It has to be indexed at the same percentage you bought below market within a 20-year time frame.
This is very important. We see in the US, in the eastern states in particular, where a lot of the co-ops are quite mature, that you do have the infrastructure that sits below it. So it's not a matter of just your classic strata management overlaid on what is an aspiration for co-op. The standard strata management bylaws that you'll find in an apartment building in Sydney means that an under 18-year-old cannot be in the common areas without an adult. This is a throwback from another time. So you need to rewrite the dark matter that sits behind the stuff that we want to do, right? So you need to support the aspiration with the logistical stuff, the legal and the accounting as well, which is, I think, what Nightingale's done, which is why it's remarkable.
And just sheer, I guess, setting up the right governance. I mean, we are so unused to all living together right now that just throwing everyone in the mix and saying live together is probably not going to work. You've actually, especially, I guess, what makes these models work is if the people that are going to live there have been part of the design process, so they at least can design in what they want into it. And it's probably just as much about the design as sitting down and writing a series of aspirational statements and ways you want to live, because it's a lot about respect and setting up how you all want to live together, because it's not just going to happen tomorrow fruitfully, happily. It could be World War III. You really need to set up some pretty, I guess, good guidelines that you all agree to and want to live to and aspire to.
But I guess, sorry.
Christian and then a question.
I guess the models that you mentioned here in Australia with Nightingale and the land trust models, they are filling a gap that governments used to provide, right?
Correct.
And I don't know if they ever existed here in Australia, I'm not sure, because the density just may have not necessitated government intervention, but in Europe, of course, it's been there before.
I'm going to intervene here. Until 1982, cooperatives, housing cooperatives, was a cabinet position in New South Wales.
Yeah, no, exactly.
We used to be good at it.
No, exactly. So you had that they're basically filling this gap now, right? And the question of paying rent is okay or not okay, it's just the question of who you're paying rent to, right? And who you're actually providing the profit to, so to speak. If basically it's going back into some reinvestment to local infrastructure and so on, right? Then that's okay paying rent. Germany, for example, was a rent-paying nation until about 10 years ago, right? And everybody rented, and everybody was okay with it, and prices never rose, right? In the land values just didn't. My dad sold so many properties again because there was no point of having them. Yeah, you never made any money from it. And then the switch came, of course, like everywhere else, and now it's becoming the same problem there. But at least it's still. I think it's legally binding 25% affordable housing, so in state hands as well, which keeps the price still down and the mix within, the social mix within cities alive. But
I think here it's about 2%. I think we push for 5 maximum, no? But and I think it's that whole inclusionary zoning that might help kind of get this going, but there isn't really much of that in place, is there? So, 30% that Europe aspires to is by no means
20% in New York.
built. I mean, I think I even went to a talk by really big developers the other day at ATP, and they're doing all this research into what's required, what targets what we're going to meet, and they put up that 30-40% target. But what are we aspiring for? 5. And I was like, guys, I mean, you're doing all this research, but then you're not even trying to meet your own target. So it's still quite disheartening.
Hi. How do you ensure that affordable housing doesn't become a poverty ghetto?
How does it become what?
A poverty ghetto.
How does it not become a ghetto?
I think it comes back to what you were saying before.
So this is where I love cooperatives, right? So if you look at public housing and affordable housing across the world, a lot of it's, again, the unilateral vision of an affordable housing provider or a public authority delivering housing for people in need, right? So we're building all these homes for people in need, and they don't have much say in it, right? We try to do the most cost-effective, livable place and put them in there through some kind of lottery system. The cooperative models you see across Europe and some in New York, the residents were part of the process. The residents have ownership of the governance of their place. They have custodianship. They're empowered to have decision-making about how to program the buildings, how they're going to live. Do they want an orphanage? Do they want daycare? Look at Hunziker, Ariel, and Zurich. It's probably 500 units, big cooperative. And when you have people having a say, meaning it's citizen-involved, participatory development, you get a much different outcome of stewardship of place and care of place when you have ownership of your place. It's a very beautiful complex. There's orphanages in it, there's daycare, there's a whole mix of affordability, there's experimental floor plates happening there. And because it's a cooperative and it's not a profit-driven outcome, there's community use facilities on the ground plane, so the public realm is hyper-activated. It's an amazing place. We need that in Sydney. We don't need, there's a whole different way of engaging with communities in need and low-income families and people. That's very different than the kind of top-down approach to doing housing. So I think that's a way to kind of avoid that. We failed miserably in the mid-20th century doing it. There are many cities still feel like we're doing 1960s urban renewal, but a lot of cities have gotten better at that and figured out to work with the community, not doing anything to a community.
I think with that and with the ambition of closing at 8:30, I presume the bar is still open. I hope it is. Vince, do you want to wrap us up, take us home, and then I'll ask everyone to thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think you'd be better at wrapping it up, though.
I'll wrap up.
Yeah, can you wrap it up?
You
I'll
say
thank-
something, I'll wrap up.
Okay. Well, I just want to. I just want to say thank you for everyone coming. Of course, it's been a really interesting evening, very interesting conversation. I want to thank all the guys that are here tonight because all three of you care passionately about what you do, and are making a significant change in the way that we live today. So I think it's amazing. So well done. I want to thank Tim as well for being the compere. How you say it? Compere?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Sounds like it's got flair.
I can listen to you all night. Actually, that doesn't sound good. I won't say that. That doesn't sound right. What are you doing later? But I think you should wrap up. I also want to thank Adobe. Adobe is one of our main sponsors too. Amazing organization that's actually contributed to helping us put this on every month. So, as I hadn't said that, every month we do a defrost here or in the garage. Different subject every time, different speakers, and it's really cool. So look out for the monthly email around what's coming up. So I'd love to see you here again.
Thank you. It's 51 of them. I can't believe that, Vince. Well done on bringing the collective together in the collective here in the courtyard. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for the questions and the discussion. Keep it going. It's interesting, I think, some of the stuff we've been talking about. We used to be better at it, which is great because it's always hard building from nothing, but it's a lot easier building from something which we just forgot. And as I say, we used to be quite good at co-ops and mutuals. For those who want to know, actually there is now a business council for co-ops and mutuals. In Australia, it's only a couple of years old. So the infrastructure is building again. It's a little bit like Terminator, which is probably exactly the wrong analogy to draw. But no matter how much you abuse it, it will return, which maybe says something about Sydney. Thank you very much. If you can join me in thanking Vince and Katie and Jason and Christian.
And Tim.